Okay, today I'm joined by someone that in the Bisping household we are big fans of, Dr. James Dinicolantonio. Doctor, thank you for your time. I can't say that I've ever said I've been a big fan of a doctor on social media before, but you are the first and you've taken some time out of your day to join us, so thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
No, of course. I mean, I see you everywhere on social media. And the things that you post, they really resonate with me, with my wife, with my mother-in-law. It's just such easy and seems logical sense, that for people to live a better lifestyle, a lot of the stuff that you post, it's so practical, it's so achievable, and ultimately will make you live a better, longer, happier life.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to kind of simplify all this scientific stuff so that, a normal, regular person can implement a few things and dramatically improve their life, just whether it's eating a little more protein or cutting down a little bit on the carbohydrate. Like, there's simple steps like that most people can take to really dramatically improve their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get started or go any further, just give the people that aren't familiar with you. You've got over 3 million followers on Instagram. Every time you post, I'm seeing celebrities, MMA fighters, people in my world, so you've got a large following. But for anyone that doesn't, and for me actually, give me a bit of your background, please. I know you're an author, a best-selling author. I know you're a cardiologist, but for anyone that doesn't know, please.
Yeah, so I graduated with my Doctor of Pharmacy from the University of Buffalo, and then I became a cardiovascular research scientist at St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute. And my job was to literally read the literature and publish on nutrition, health, exercise, etc. So my goal was not necessarily to work with clients, although later on I did, including some high-profile MMA fighters too, on how to improve performance. But it was to literally just research what's the best supplements to take, what's the best diet to do, etc. And so I'm more of sort of like a book smart, if you want to take that approach to it, because my job was to study the literature and to publish in the literature. So I have about 300 academic publications in the medical literature, mostly on nutrition.
Okay, well, you got to remember, I'm a knucklehead. I got punched in the head for a living, so please dumb it down and use layman terms. When you said MMA fighters, anybody that you'd mind sharing with us? Anyone that we'd know?
So let's just say some high-profile fighters.
Okay, all right, fair enough. One of the main things I see you talking about, and it's something that we've really implemented into our lifestyle, is walking. It's a big thing that you promote. Of course, I'm assuming that's because, the modern lifestyle is sedentary. A lot of people are sitting at their desks all day long. But is it deeper than that? Is it more than just about moving calories, or is it that walking specifically is so important for the human body?
Yeah. So if you think about it from like how we used to move, our ancestors, like when we were hunter-gatherers for the last 2.5 million years, we would walk anywhere between 15 to 20,000 steps a day. So like our genome is like attuned to doing this. And now we've taken ourselves out of nature where most people are working 9-to-5 office jobs, and we're not really walking much. The average American only walks maybe 3,000 to 4,000 steps per day. So we're supposed to be walking 15,000 to 20,000 steps per day. So it's just something that we're supposed to be doing. Even if you're at a desk, let's say every hour, try to get up and walk for 5 minutes. If you can at least do that, that's going to help for sure.
So what is the ideal amount of steps? I know back in the day, 15,000, but if for a normal person, because we all have it on our phone, what would be, an ideal target amount of steps where you can look at that and say, okay, that's okay?
So there's actually some good literature that's looked into this, and they've actually kind of broken it out by age group. So if you are over 60 years old, if you hit 6,000 to 7,000 steps, that is associated with the lowest risk of mortality. If you're less than 60 years old, you want to try to get closer to 10,000 steps per day.
And I saw the post where you're talking about that there. And it basically says, that's your key to living a longer life, correct?
Correct. That's what's associated with the basically lowest risk of death over the time frame of the population that was studied in those tests. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll look at a population even up to 100,000 people, and they'll look at them for over 7-8 years. And the risk of dying in those 7 years is the lowest when someone walks about 10,000 steps per day.
And it's literally the easiest thing to do, because nobody likes to run. I'm kind of a freak that I enjoy running. My wife hates it, but if you've got a dog going for a nice leisurely stroll, it's literally the easiest thing to do, and it's so attainable. Another thing that you preach about a lot that I really enjoy is the benefits of lifting weights. And certainly as you're starting to get older, I get on my wife's case all the time. We were just in the garage this morning. That's why I was rushing around last minute a little bit late, because we just did our leg day. But that's something that you talk about a lot, certainly as people are getting older, because to maintain the muscle, well, if you're maintaining the muscle, then it's easier to fight off the fat, and then you're just going to age more gracefully, correct?
That's 100% correct. So, I mean, the easiest way to burn fat is to do it in your sleep. And the best way to do that is to have more muscle, because muscle at a resting state primarily utilizes fat when for energy. And so the more muscle you have, the more fat you're going to burn during doing nothing. And so you're not even going to notice it when you build and put on a little muscle. Now, a lot of women tend to kind of fear putting on too much muscle if they lift weights. That really doesn't happen unless you are using extremely high amounts of weight and lifting, very, very frequently. You're not going to be like this absolute Hulk. So it is important as we age, we have to understand that once we hit 30, the decline starts in both strength, in both muscle mass. And if you don't offset that, it develops into what's called sarcopenia, which is basically the loss of muscle as we age. And that can lead to falls and fractures and even death. So it's really important that you are fighting every day to preserve that muscle mass.
Yeah, without question. And it's funny that you said, because that was the first thing my wife said. I don't want to look muscly. I'm like, babe, most guys do want to look muscly, and they hit the gym. And guess what? They're not all muscly. You're not going to be muscle bound and ripped. But what kind of workout regime would you advise?
So, I mean, it depends on the person, right? Like, my recommendation would be much different for someone who's 70 or 80 years old versus someone who's 30, and a man, let's say. But I would say ideally, if you can walk those 8,000 to 10,000 steps per day, and then once you have that down pretty well, you can sort of do incline walking. So you either find a hill or you set your treadmill to 10% incline and you walk at 2 to 4 miles per hour. And that really is a nice notch up on just, okay, walking's too easy. What's the next step? So doing incline walking or hill walking. I try to do cardio 3 times a week in regards to I'm going to jog a mile 3 times a week. That's something I do enjoy as well. But I do find that I have to run on the grass, because if I run just on the pavement, it can hurt my knees. But just simply running on the grass, that will help that issue out, or taking collagen too can help as well. And then lifting weights, it depends on how you want to do it. If you are doing a full body workout, you don't have to lift as many times per week as you would, let's say, if you're just doing upper body or lower body. But I try to lift at least 3 times a week. It's somewhere in the 6 to 10 rep range, where the last 2 to 3 reps is difficult. Yep. So that's kind of like where, basically, if you're lifting a weight and you can lift it, 15 times, and the last couple times are not difficult, you're lifting too light. So you want to try to be in that 6 to 10, maybe 12 rep range is perfect, where the last 2 to 3 reps are fairly difficult. You really don't want to go to failure every single time. If you constantly go to failure, meaning like you're barely able to lift it, then you're not going to be able to lift as much the next basically set, and your recovery is going to be longer. So lifting close to failure is better than lifting to failure.
Yeah, and obviously as you get older, the risk for injury increases massively if you go into, if you're really having to, then you're going to hurt yourself. But all the working out, all the walking, all the lifting, all the rest of it doesn't mean a thing if what you're putting in your body is complete rubbish. And I know there's a lot of diet advice that you give. Would you care to share what is kind of like an ideal diet for the average person? Because you've got to remember, people are busy. Times are hard. People are struggling to pay the bills and stuff like that. And generally, a lot of the healthier side of things are more expensive. But people can still afford a box of eggs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, exactly. It depends on what you are comfortable with spending on food. If money is an issue, then you can't afford pasture-raised eggs, then maybe you just do organic. I do believe that there is a huge difference between pasture-raised eggs and your typical eggs. And same thing with grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat. But if you are someone that's eating, some grain-fed meat, that's okay. You don't have to be 100% perfect with this stuff. Consistency beats perfectionism when it comes to these things. So I tend to look at it, everyone's very individualized with diets. Some people do really well on plant-based diets. Some people do really well on animal-based or even carnivore. But for the majority of people, eating mostly meat, eggs, a little bit of dairy, a little bit of fruit, some vegetables, if you tolerate those, that's probably the most ideal diet from the terms of satiety, what's not going to spike your blood sugar levels, what's going to help with building muscle. That is an animal-based diet, 100%.
Speaking of animal-based diets, fat, that's always been labeled as the enemy. I know sugar is probably the enemy, but as long as it's natural, and it's animal fats, I mean, is there a limit? I mean, too much? I mean, I guess it's everything in moderation, correct?
Correct. Ideally, you do want to source your fats from grass-fed animals because they're consuming the grass. That fat is then going to have more antioxidants. It's going to have more vitamin E. It's going to have more beta carotene. It's just going to be a healthier fat. Whereas if you are consuming, let's say a Five Guys burger, that's okay every now and then. But you probably shouldn't eat that as your main staple every single day because the fats will not be as healthy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we all, I mean, I'm sure you enjoy, we all like to have a burger here and there, and things like that. So you still got to live your life. But I think, what would you say in a percentage? Like 80%, as long as you're being okay. And then, because I try and tell my son and my children, listen, Monday to Friday, enjoy yourself. Maybe you can ease off a little bit at the weekend. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think if you can hit like around 80, 90%, that's plenty, especially around if you're really trying to be lean and super healthy, really that 90% healthy whole food diet, and then 10%, and this is from calorie intake. So if 10% of your calories comes from, let's say, a little bit of ice cream or, that Five Guys burger every now and then, that's okay.
The Five Guys burgers, they cost a fortune these days. I did that on DoorDash recently. We put the order in. I was like, yeah, no, I refuse. I'm not paying that. You mentioned there a second ago, grass-fed. And my wife actually said this, ask him about this. Is it really worth paying that? Because she does the grocery shopping. And she said, sometimes it's 2 or 3 times more expensive. She said, is it really worth paying that premium?
I think so. But I also think it's okay to have some of it in your diet. You just don't make it the majority of the meat that you eat. Half and half might be okay. I mean, I try to do 80% grass-fed, 20% grain-fed. Yeah. But if you can't afford it, you can't afford it, right? So who am I to say 80? You have to have 80%. If we're talking about optimizing your health, the more grass-fed meat you can eat, the better versus grain-fed.
Okay. Talk to me about diet sodas. Right, because one of my things in my life, I like a little can of Coke Zero here and there. And they've been demonized, and I totally get it. I know the artificial sweeteners are terrible for you. But the studies that I see, they say that basically it plays a trick on your brain, and you might as well be drinking a regular can of soda. What is your opinions on diet sodas?
I would say it depends on the person. How is it affecting you? So if it is allowing you to not consume 12 to 24 ounces of full sugar cola, then that's probably a better alternative.
Yeah, that's what I always think.
Yeah, 100%. If you can try to avoid saccharin and aspartame and sucralose as well, those 3 have been shown in small human clinical studies to potentially alter the gut microbiome and to potentially worsen insulin resistance. So try to minimize those. I actually tried to test the aspartame thing, where I drank about 4 12-ounce bottles of Fresca for a week, and I literally got aspartame toxicity. Honestly, it felt like I was drunk. Like I was nauseous, vertigo, felt like I had to throw up. Like I had consumed so much aspartame from Fresca, which tastes amazing. I mean, most people enjoy Fresca. But after 1 week of consuming about 1 liter of that, I just want to see, is this actually going to affect my health? I developed a severe toxicity from that.
Wow. So avoid the Frescas.
just don't overdo it. I don't know how people can consume 1 liter of Fresca and get away with that, because I was messed up.
I mean, some people's habits are just terrible. An old buddy of mine used to do a 2-liter bottle of Coke every day, and then his teeth started falling out. Shouts out Blanky if you're watching this. We're talking now about diet sodas. One of my main issues, one of my main problems, because I work out most days, I lift most days, I have a good diet for the most part, but the sugar cravings, I mean, I love chocolate. I always have. Your advice is what is it? Put a little pickle juice or put some salt on the tongue. And my wife says, Michael, listen to James Dinicolantonio, take some pickle juice, put a bit of salt on the tongue. And I'm like, shut the hell up.
Yeah, you're like, get out of here with that. I want my your ice cream. Yeah. Well, I think it 100% does work. And different people have different flavors and how they want to do this. But essentially, salt helps cut the sugar cravings pretty quickly. So if you have like a quick shot, like a 2-ounce shot of pickle juice, it does help. You put salt on the tongue, it will help, or you consume just like some salt and electrolytes, and that will help because salt and sugar have both taste receptors and they both activate the brain. So you can sort of get that reward with salt instead of sugar. And if you don't get enough salt, that can actually lead to sugar cravings. So it kind of depends on why are you craving the sugar. A lot of times, a lot of people just don't have enough salt, especially if they're eating a whole food diet. You don't really get much salt on a whole food diet. So adding that back can help with sugar cravings, but sometimes you just haven't had enough carbs in the day too. And having some berries or figuring out like what can you take to kind of fix that, even if it's like a small square of dark chocolate, that's fine.
Yeah, I have half a massive bar of milk chocolate, but still, one thing we do every day, I'm drinking it right here. The salt in the water, obviously sea salt, Redmond salt, the salt in the water with the lemon in the morning. Why is that so advisable?
Well, most people drink coffee in the morning, and coffee will reduce the absorption of salt and water by about 20%. And then it also kicks salt and water out in the urine as well. So you really want to get that in before you consume your caffeine. So the best thing you can do in the morning, there's 3 things in the morning that everyone should be doing. Hydrating with salt and electrolytes, getting morning sunlight, and then you either eat a high protein fat breakfast to keep you satiated, or you just skip breakfast. Those 3 things can really help set your day right and fix a lot of the binging and cravings that people have throughout the day.
Why is the morning sunlight so important?
That's what helps set your circadian rhythm. And really what that means is that is allowing melatonin to release in the appropriate amount and at the appropriate time to help you fall asleep. So getting sunlight in the morning helps release more melatonin at night and at the appropriate time.
I see. Okay. You mentioned there skipping breakfast, intermittent fasting. This is a big boom right now. A lot of people do it. I mean, I kind of do it mainly just to restrict my calories. But there's pros and cons. How do you feel about intermittent fasting as a whole? What are the pros and cons?
I feel like for someone like you and me, who's muscular, who's active, who probably trains fairly hard, we do better with a hearty breakfast with high protein, high fat, etc. If you're someone though that isn't working out as much anymore, then intermittent fasting works really well for a lot of people who aren't as active.
And is there a truth to the studies that when you're in the fasting mode, your body is essentially more effective at fighting off potentially cancerous cells? Because that's what I've seen around. I mean, obviously, I'm not a doctor. A lot of my information comes from social media and stuff like that. I can't pretend. But that's the kind of stuff that I see. Is that nonsense, or is there any truth to that?
The truth is in the studies that have actually looked at fasting and then giving chemotherapy. So that has shown better resistance of your healthy cells to getting damage and better killing effects of the chemotherapy when you are in a fasted state. So there's been numerous studies now that have looked at people who have fasted 2 or 3 days and then they get chemotherapy, especially if you do chemotherapy at nighttime, because your healthy cells aren't turning over as quickly and chemo accumulates in rapidly accumulating cells. So if you can get chemo at night, that's a checkbox, that's good. And if you can fast for 2 to 3 days, that has been shown to be beneficial. Now, whether fasting helps you fight off cancer cells, I think that's a step that people are taking that they should be taking.
I see. Okay. So kind of disregard that information for the time being.
Yeah, and there's a lot of claims too that if you cut out all sugar that will cure cancer, which is absurd.
That's absurd because that is something that I see so much of these days.
Yeah, I mean there are certain brain cancers that are very sensitive to if you do restrict your sugar intake that can help. But you got to understand, cancer can 100% utilize your own body's fat stores to grow. It can metabolize your own cell membranes to grow. It'll get amino acids too that you will never be able to eliminate out of your diet to grow. So you're never going to be able to cure most cancers by simply cutting out sugar in your diet.
Okay. Saunas, ice baths. This is a big craze right now. I just got out of the ice bath myself right now. How do you feel about that? Is a lot of benefit to these? Would you recommend?
Okay, so from a mental health perspective and a little bit of fat burning perspective, yes, ice baths can have benefits. And especially for MMA trainers, like if you're in a camp and you need to train the next day and you don't want to be sore, yeah, ice baths work really well. For the average person, though, you try to want to push off an ice bath after a workout by about 4 hours, because when you inhibit the inflammation right after a workout, you are going to decrease some of the gains. So you will decrease muscle protein synthesis, right? And even collagen synthesis. So it's almost like you don't want to blunt what nature's trying to do, right? So just give it a few hours before you jump into the ice bath if that's something you do enjoy.
I've been doing it wrong this whole time. The reason I do it is because there's only so many hours in a day. I do my morning run, then I lift my weights, I sit in the sauna, and then I finish off with the ice bath, just because it stops me sweating when I'm sitting here doing something like this at the last minute. But is it better to still do it, or would you definitely wait a few hours?
Definitely wait a few hours, because the cold will inhibit muscle protein synthesis. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I definitely need to change that one. Thank you very much. In this modern day and age, with modern science and medical science is progressing so much, what do you think is, how old should the average human being be living? If we live a great lifestyle and we're not unlucky and you don't catch something crazy, what on average, how long should we live?
I think most people should be living to 100.
Really?
I truly believe that. I mean, the average American's only living to about 78 now. So, they're missing about 20 years of life. And most of those years, too, which is the most important part, is filled with chronic disease, diabetes, right? Amputations, kidney failure, heart disease, Alzheimer's. Even if we're lucky enough to reach to 90 years old now, 1 in 2 people will have dementia. And a lot of this thing, I truly believe a lot of this comes down to, the diet and the environment that we live in now. The hidden seed oils are a huge issue. Cooking with seed oils is a huge issue because that is tremendous oxidative stress on the body, and they're hidden in everything. I mean, I can't go anywhere now where canola oil isn't what they use. And like Core Life, they use some canola oil. Like Chipotle, I know, at least in the past, is canola oil, and I used to eat there all the time. And so it's like you try to avoid restaurants as much as you can, or try to find a restaurant that utilizes, either animal fats or healthier source of cooking oil like olive oil versus these seed oils that are they're very bad for your health.
It's just so hard though, isn't it? It really is. And it's such a shame. I mean, it's crazy that the amount of, let's use the word poisonous foods that are allowed here with respect in the United States. We live here. I have a great life here. But in the EU, they're not allowed. They're completely banned, but yet the FDA allow it all here. It really does blow my mind.
Yeah, I mean, corporate America, right? That's the problem is profits over health and we really do need to change that. We need to shift focus from at least taxing these big food companies for creating the junk food, but why not incentivize them to create healthier options? Like we incentivize currently food companies to produce grains, corn, soy. Right? That stuff is subsidized by the government. They give them money to grow those harmful foods. And so we need to kind of switch that around a bit and start incentivizing healthy foods so it's more affordable for us too.
It's insane. It just blows my mind. And the more I start to learn about this type of thing, I find myself just getting more and more frustrated. Yeah, it's crazy. I had a question here. My daughter wants to know this. She's raw everything, right? She's having raw milk, raw honey. And my wife's like, well, hold on. Because when I grew up, pasteurized was the way to go because the heat kills the bacteria. And now she says, no, it's got to be raw. It's got to be raw. Who's correct, my daughter or my wife?
I mean, if you look at it from an ancestral perspective, yes, we would have never pasteurized milk, let's say. Is there a risk, though, that if you do get a batch that's bad, that there could be really harmful effects? Yes. And that's the scary part, right? And so if I could consume raw milk and I knew every single time that I could consume it, there wouldn't be a contamination, I would consume raw milk. But because I don't have 100% control of that, I consume grass-fed milk. I don't consume a ton every day. I consume maybe 6 to 8 ounces of grass-fed milk a day for the calcium. But yeah, I mean, there are some studies looking at animals where they give the raw milk versus the pasteurized milk, and the animals do thrive better, they grow better, their bones look healthier. But again, you kind of are playing a little bit of Russian roulette there.
Okay. No, that's good to know, because that's kind of what we thought. But she craves it. And one thing that I do crave is a coffee. And I've been watching your videos, and I know that you say drinking coffee, essentially there's lots of benefits to it, but it also can lead to lack of salt in your body, expelling salt from your bloodstream or from your body, correct?
So basically, coffee is what's called a natriuretic and a chloriuretic. It's not just a diuretic. So a diuretic is, something that causes water loss. And that's really not that big of an issue unless you're consuming up to 4 cups of coffee or more per day. But it is a big salt waster. Not a lot of people know that. Most people don't know that. I didn't even know that until a few years ago, to be fair. But
why does that matter? Why does that matter for someone that doesn't understand?
It matters because it's depleting your body of salt. So if you're eating a healthy diet like you and I, we're eating an animal-based diet, we're not getting much salt anymore. We're not consuming the salty blood that we used to get when we hunted and consumed, let's say, wild animals. So you have to add it back. But if you have something that's flushing it out of your system, like coffee, then that can lead to depletion of your blood volume, dizziness, lack of focus, lack of energy to feel like you want to work out. So a lot of people are suffering from these issues, and it's simply because they're consuming too much coffee and they're losing all that salt out in the urine. So 4 cups of coffee will cause you to lose a half a teaspoon of salt out of the urine. That's a fairly high amount of sodium. That's 1,200 milligrams of sodium, which that's basically the maximum that the American Heart Association tells you should be consuming in an entire day. And you can lose that just consuming 4 cups of coffee per day.
Yeah, I mean, salt was always demonized, though, as having too much salt in your diet will lead to high blood pressure. But are you talking about 2 different things here, right?
So the thing is that with salt, you got to understand it's an essential mineral. And most of the salt sensitivity where it will lead to high blood pressure is driven by a few factors: overeating refined carbs and sugar, or not consuming enough potassium or magnesium. You get people to do those things, 90% of the salt sensitivity will go away, and you can enjoy a normal amount of salt again. So don't blame salt for what the sugar did, is what I constantly say, because the sugar is what's causing an insulin to increase, and insulin is what causes you to over-retain salt.
So yesterday, and I'm always being silly, but yesterday we're sitting at the diner, we're having our lunch, I'm drinking a coffee, and my wife says, Michael, remember, you're going to lose salt. And I said, but yeah, look, I'm putting salt on my food. And I know that's me being silly, but just explain to people that might think, well, hold on a minute, I can just put salt on my food. It doesn't quite work like that, correct?
Well, so a few things. Remember I had said that coffee can inhibit the absorption of salt, right? Okay. So if you can do it first thing beforehand, that's a little bit better. You're going to be able to absorb 20% more salt, and you're getting ahead of the problem too. But yes, if you add salt to your food, that will help as well to get back the salt that the coffee is causing you to lose.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, finally, we'll end on this. Diets. There's all these fad diets. There's vegans, there's keto, there's paleo, there's all the rest of it. And as we said right at the beginning, the food, what you put in your body is the most important thing. I always say you can't out-exercise a bad diet. In terms of a diet, in terms of a label, shall we say, what diet would you recommend as the best for the average human being?
I would say an animal-based diet. But you do want some carbs too. I think people go too crazy on keto and carnivore and no carb. I did that, but after a year, you're going to start feeling pretty bad. And the reason is because our body, our brain, 100% has to run on glucose. And yes, our body can make it. But the problem is that you have to, certain hormones will activate like cortisol and noradrenaline, and you have to break down proteins then to start forming that glucose. So eventually, most people should be landing on consuming somewhere between 40 and 120 grams of carbs for the average person. That's like a sweet spot. When you start going higher than that, you really got to start increasing your activity level. Like as an athlete, I'm sure you are consuming 200-300 grams of carbs, no problem. But most people aren't elite MMA fighters. So a lot of people do benefit on going on a really low carb diet for a while, but talk to someone 1 or 2 years after that diet and usually what they come back and say is, yeah, I needed to start adding some fruit. I needed to start adding some raw honey to my diet because I just needed those carbs to feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Veganism, what's your feelings on that as a whole?
Horrific.
Why?
Well, basically, the surveys have shown that 5 years after looking at vegans, 90% of them quit due to catastrophic health failure because you can't get certain nutrients from a vegan diet. You can't get B12, you can't get vitamin K2. You're not going to get a lot of the active forms of vitamins as well. And show me a vegan that's thriving, that's building a lot of muscle, that's not consuming like plant protein. You're not going to be able to get enough protein eating a vegan diet. You're going to have to supplement with
But you can lecture people at dinner. You can be a social justice warrior on Instagram and you can make out that you're a do-gooder. So maybe,
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like,
I'm joking.
What you're into. And I don't want to, bash people for their beliefs, but it is what it is. We would hunt animals. Animals kill animals to eat, and this is what life is. So to say that we should be eating a vegan diet because we shouldn't be killing animals, a lot more animals actually get killed harvesting the plants for vegan diets, like the rabbits, etc., versus killing one cow, which can feed you for an entire year.
Yeah, no, it is kind of crazy when you look at it like that. Doctor, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I truly appreciate it. I'm going to watch this back. I'm going to try and let this all marinate in there and follow your advice. Anyone who isn't following Dr. James Dinicolantonio, I suggest you give him a follow. I'll put your link down at the bottom. Thank you very much. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm a big fan of your work and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Anytime.